Yes. Nice to see you all again. Session 3 of our little mini course in trauma. And we are going to cover today a little bit about the practice acronym outlined for trauma-focused CBT, the work and review of how offenders operate so that we can better understand some of the tactic that people who are abusive might use with their loved ones, with their family. And we need to be able to recognize that in our clients, as well as that they might have been on the receiving end or might be on the receiving end of those tactics as a survivor of domestic violence or past violence and trauma. And then if we have time today, we'll also maybe knock out some of the neurobiology PowerPoint, but we'll see how we go. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to watch a little short video. Do you guys see a YouTube up? Is that what's up on the screen? Okay,
Yes.
great. Great, thank you. Gonna make this big. This is a short one, 4.5 minutes, just an overview of TFCBT.
I can't hear her talking.
Same.
Yeah, no sound.
Y'all can't hear her. That's interesting. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Why wouldn't you be able to hear her? I don't know. Like, there's nothing I have to do differently to share. Maybe just let me try just sharing my screen, and then I'll pull it up on my screen. And if this doesn't work, then I'll send it out to you as a link. Can you hear it now? No.
No.
Whack. Okay. I'll send you out Dr. Joan separately then. Hush, Joan. Now she's talking to me a lot, and you guys can't even hear her, so I'll send that out to you. She just does a nice little overview of the approach. So instead, let me share. CBT. Here we go. All right. Can you see the PDF here? What are the components of TFCBT?
Yes.
Great. All right. So one of the things that I find when I'm doing trauma work is there's so much going on with our clients that it can be hard to keep track of the flow of the work from start to finish. And what will happen a lot of times is clients come in and we are completely focused on whatever the crisis of the moment is that week. And then, if we only see them an hour a week, we might use up that whole hour just trying to like deal with the crises that have happened in the prior week. And we don't really make a lot of progress towards stabilizing the client's emotions and behaviors. Like, let's say it's substance use. We don't even get to work on stabilizing activities towards their substance use because we're dealing with whatever's gone awry currently in their life. So I find it really helpful to have a roadmap for myself, but also for the client to kind of map out what are the key things that we're going to be working on. And so I actually try to put these concrete things into the treatment plan. So let's say you're doing a treatment plan and you're at the very front end of that work. You're going to be really focusing on what coping skills, grounding skills, maybe even psychoeducation, like what are we going to be doing in the first couple months together? And the focus of that is very, for those who were here at one of the prior sessions, we really talked about stage 1 work, which is stabilization work and managing strong feelings. Because the rest of the work can't really be performed very well, can't really happen very smoothly for the client if we're still in that churn and the tumultuousness of the client who's being triggered every day and all over the place, having a lot of different crises, but also having just emotional crises because they get upset at a hair's breadth trigger, and then they're, dysregulated for a day, a week, weeks. I mean, it's like we really have to do a lot of stabilization work for anything else to be able to happen successfully. So this practice acronym, and in the work, it's actually 2 P's for the children's work, but it'll just be 1 P for the adult work. It outlines kind of the overall path. So I'm talking all over the place. Let's just look at this. Trauma-focused CBT is a short-term treatment approach that can be successful in as few as 12 sessions. So when a child's been traumatized, they might be referred for this specific type of therapy. It involves sessions with the child and sessions with the parents, because one of the goals of trauma-focused CBT is that the therapist is helping the parent understand how to be supportive and helpful to the child's healing process. And the nutshell of that is the same for adults, that we need to be able to tell our story, share our truth, talk about our feelings, and have those experiences supported, validated, and, kind of a caring response. Not judgment, not victim blaming, and unfortunately, we know that victim blaming is very prevalent in society. So sometimes parents, especially when they're upset that their child's been hurt, sometimes sort of like reflexively will say judgmental or, well, you shouldn't have been over there. If you hadn't been over there, you wouldn't have had XYZ happen to you. Or if you hadn't done this, then that probably wouldn't have happened. Which is actually just further wounds the child emotionally. So we really try to help caregivers respond more appropriately to the traumatized children that they are caregiving. But the same is true for adults, right? I mean, one of the things that is so wounding about interpersonal trauma is, beyond the trauma itself, is how other people react to the trauma. And unfortunately, we don't always have friends and family members saying the helpful things to us. And I sympathize a bit, because like people don't know how to react to these things. I think it's getting better. I think the fact that there's so much discussion now in social media and with the Me Too and the Time's Up movements, I think people are more, like, you see more of those positive responses to disclosure now. But I think it's important that we're building a supportive environment. Even if the person in front of us as a client, even if we're the only supportive response they get, that is so much more important than none at all, right? We can be that person for the clients in front of us. So psychoeducation is the first P, and that's the one that applies to youth and adults, about the impact of trauma and common trauma reactions. So the reason we are going to focus on neurobiology, for example, is educating a client that the reactiveness that they're experiencing is a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder can be an eye-opening realization, and helping them realize, oh, I am because I'm the way I am today, possibly because of the trauma that I've gone through up till today. And furthermore, the way I am today is there's a diagnosis for that. Like there's a label for that. Post traumatic stress disorder, post traumatic stress. And even better, even more important, there are a lot of different concrete strategies and treatments that we can work on together that can help bring down the reactivity and emotional turmoil that we live in when we have active PTSD. The goal is to get that whole reactivity more stabilized. So helping the client understand, okay, things happen to us. What are the symptoms you're struggling with? We can actually address some of those symptoms directly and you will feel better. That's the key. That's the whole map, right? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we recommending what we're recommending? We have to paint that picture really clearly in the service planning part of our discussions with clients because you're asking people to deal with their trauma head on and you're always going to be fighting some degree of avoidance. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to talk about it. And just that whole kind of feeling of I'm coming to therapy or counseling or I'm coming to talk to you and me just being here and talking to you is supposed to somehow fix everything. And we want to kind of challenge that notion because somebody coming to therapy and just talking about the crises of their week, they'll get a little positive benefit from that because it's like, oh, I got it off my chest. But it will not create like functional change in the same way of doing some of those other key action step work, like teaching grounding skills, practicing grounding skills, self-soothing. Like sometimes clients have a reaction of like almost like, well, that I shouldn't have to do all that work because I'm the one who got hurt. You know what I mean? Like, and it is a raw deal if you think about it. Like, you shouldn't have been abused in the first place. And now, like, oh, wait, not only was I the person who was abused, but now I have to do all the work for my own healing too. That sucks, you know? And it kind of does. It's a raw deal. And the person that deserves to have the freedom in their life, in their emotions that comes from healing is the person in front of us. So we're kind of really helping them understand that you can do this work and it does help people feel better. So that's the psychoeducation part. The R, the parenting skills would be for obviously the youth version. Relaxation and stress management skills. There's a reason why that comes so early in this acronym because that's those stage 1 skills that we need to work on. And the A is affective expression, the emotions that people struggle with. So how we need to do a lot of different emotions work from identifying what am I feeling right now to how, intense is that feeling? Like in terms of a degree, thermometer, however we want to do it, range 1 to 10, helping people be able to say and describe their emotions rather than just acting them out is really important work. And safely expressing emotions, especially sadness, anger, fear, helping people be able to safely express them rather than expressing them in ways that maybe cause more problems in their life, right? So all of that affective and cognitive coping work, all of that relaxation and affective work is stage 1 work, but it's absolute, and we do it sort of if with all of our clients, but it's trauma work. I just want to name it as such. It's trauma work. It's recovery work, and it's the building blocks for all the success that can follow. Um, we don't necessarily get into the cognitive processing of trauma, but we do start to we ease into that as we go along, but we need our emotions and feelings to have a little more stability before we start getting into the trauma memories, trauma narrative. Um, Otherwise, clients just get overwhelmed even more. Like, we really shouldn't be doing a lot of processing in our sessions if the client is already dysregulated emotionally. When somebody's dysregulated, the work to do is to pause whatever we're digging into and go, you know what? This thing that you've been talking to me about seems like it's really big, right? I can see that you're really upset about this. What if let's take 2 minutes and do a little grounding just so we can like bring down the heat on that just a little bit, because I think that'll be really helpful for you to be able to share what you want to share. And right then you're helping them do a grounding technique, or you can do 4 square breathing with them for a couple minutes in your office. Um, One of the best ways to learn techniques is to learn them in the moment when you like need to apply them, and have the counselor or case manager or advocate like literally say, hey, like let's do this together, because this content is the thing you're telling me about. Wow, that is super. What was a wild weekend you went through, and I can see that there's a lot of emotion about that, and rightfully so. So let's both do a little breathing right now so we can approach this, um, from a place of more like we can wrap our minds and wrap our hands around this together. As people become a little better at being able to talk about the trauma things without being completely dysregulated, then we really are helping people share. We always talk about share your story. And there, it is really important. Sometimes people ask me, like, well, do they have to tell what happened to them? And I'm like, well, in trauma work, there is no have tos. First and foremost, it's every person has the choice what they want to choose to share. And the only instruction I ever give in trauma groups is share to the degree you feel comfortable, and share what you feel like you need to say in order to be able to let things, set things aside or work through them or move forward. So I can't judge for someone else what they need to share. Oftentimes it might be the thing that they feel stuck around, not the whole trauma story. So people tell their own story in their own way. And I do think there is power in speaking about the things that have been sort of cloaked in secrecy and shame and silence, because somehow saying things aloud and receiving a supportive response helps it not have that shame attached to it anymore. And it takes time, and it takes a lot of courage to disclose about trauma. So we should always realize that if somebody tells you their trauma story or a traumatic experience, that's a big vote of trust. Like, they trust you enough to share that. And it's really kind of an honor when somebody talks to you about their real stuff. And so thanking them for trusting you, or thanking them for trusting you enough to share that what they went through, is a great response in that moment. And helping people tell the story the way and to the extent that they want to, is a really important part of the journey. Some people are doing that just with one other human being. Some people are doing that in groups. Some people are doing that, then they'll say, I want to write my autobiography. So, and I've had a person come through group that never verbally said anything at all about her story, but she painted. She was a artistic person, And so she would paint different, like whenever it was time to share and she had the space to share and disclose, it was always a painting that she would share with the group and kind of describe what it contained for her. So everybody's different, and that's okay. The last parts of the practice acronym, in vivo mastery, is out in the world, right? Overcoming situations that maybe we've avoided because of fear of the trauma or triggers. C is these parent-child sessions that help the two talk to each other. So there wouldn't be an equivalent necessarily in adult work, except maybe, if there's, some adults who are doing their trauma work end up needing to do some boundary work or I don't want to say confrontation because that might be too strong of a word, but like addressing family members that are in their life today who maybe are, either still saying hurtful things or are, they're in a positive relationship for the most part, but this issue from the past is not yet resolved. And confrontations with people who are where we don't anticipate that it's going to go well is something that we could talk about it in a future session, I guess, but it takes some planning for it to go well. And it'll take too long to go into that right now, but like some survivors do need to do some discussions, heart to heart discussions with, like, let's say their parent that was maybe not very protective, a sibling who says unsympathetic things. Partners need to sometimes understand more about what somebody's gone through, because maybe they're saying unhelpful things. There's actually a book called Allies in Healing that is great for partners of adults who were molested as children. The authors of Courage to Heal wrote a partner companion book for that very reason. So that's a nice, helpful resource. And then in the final phase, enhancing future safety. So we've maybe done some safety planning earlier in the discussion in the work in the stabilization stage, but we also are trying to not fall into like an unsafe relationship or, basically we know that trauma tends to continue to happen to people until they recognize different boundary setting, et cetera. So some of that work is enhancing future safety. Okay. Questions or thoughts on the practice acronym or any of its pieces? I'll just pause there. You can unmute or you can type stuff in the chat. Does it feel like a logical progression of what the counseling could focus on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. All right. He says yes. Okay. All right. Now let's talk a little bit concretely about offender dynamics. Get to the start here. And sometimes people who are like, I only want to work with survivors. I don't want to work with abusers. And I always challenge that a little bit. And I think this team would know that it's not always as cut and dry as there's victims in one camp and there's abusers in another camp. And like, if I only want to work with the victims, that doesn't work out very well. Kathy, you have your hand up. What you got?
Okay, so our population is extremely transient.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that doing the 12 steps would work? And if we started this and we and we lose that person for a couple of weeks, when we come back, will we do a continuation, or will we try to go back to the beginning and see if we can start getting them to come a little bit more regularly?
That's a great question. So the practice like acronym, what I would be thinking about for that person is, have we done the psychoeducation piece? Do they understand that they are in a cycle of trauma? Do they understand that that trauma impacts them? Do they right? Like, have we covered that? And maybe we've covered it to the point where they get it.
Okay.
We don't need to redo the P when they come
Okay.
in the next time.
Okay.
Then I'm like, okay, have they gotten those emotional regulation skills, the grounding, right? Do they
Okay.
have those skills on board? Do they have those tools in their toolbox? And if not, then when they come in next time, let's work on skills. So
Okay.
knowing where the client is in their basically their progress is what should dictate what you focus on the next time they come in, whether that's tomorrow or 2 weeks or 2 months, because you want to be sort of focusing on the things that are going to have the most utility.
Okay.
And at Sisters, a lot of that work is in those the skill acquisition stage.
Yeah.
Getting more stable emotionally, behaviorally, getting more stable with mental health, getting more stable with substance use, and getting connected to places and spaces to then potentially do their focused work, whether it's their substance use treatment work, their mental health. Let's say it's, oh, okay, we got to the point now where they're willing to have a psych eval, for example, or
Okay.
do some, let's say they're acknowledging, yes, I feel a lot of these PTSD symptoms that you're talking about. Well, what do you think about doing some PTSD treatment? Focused
Okay.
treatment, right? Like whether it's, let's go over to WHRP and do the AOTA and seeking safety groups, or something one-on-one through CCS, or continuing to do some work ad hoc when they're at Sisters. I think how they do that work is different than knowing, like, okay, yes, that's the work I feel like I need to do, want to do, in order to help my life move forward, right? Or be better. I want my life to feel more stable and safe. Any of those are possibilities, but where they're at in that work, like what is the work? That's what I'm talking about, using that acronym to kind of guide, like, where are we in this process?
Okay.
Yep. Good question. All right. So sometimes I do get like the question of why why do we need to study offenders if we don't plan on working with offenders? And there are a couple answers to that. There's a lot of gray area in life, first and foremost. Sometimes people, in fact, a lot of times people have elements of, they've been victimized, and sometimes they then have acted out in the same ways or in different ways, but are in one way or another using aggression or using controlling tactics, manipulative tactics. So I think it's good to just break down that whole sense of there's victims or offenders. And those labels, I think, are also sometimes not very helpful, especially in terms of a person in front of us. So it's much more helpful, I think, to think about, are we internalizing or externalizing the pain that we've gone through? That tends to resonate a lot better with people. But we also need to understand offender behavior as, when we're working with people who've gone through all sorts of hard and terrible things, And we want to understand that so that we understand the impacts of what they've gone through. You know, some types of trauma embed themselves more deeply. We talked last time about, you know, one of the reasons why trauma is so impactful to children is because they don't have a sense of self very defined yet. It's a work in progress, and it tends to get internalized. The impacts of trauma tend to get internalized as almost like, this is just how I am. This is just how the world is. But I think too, some of the very personal nature of interpersonal trauma tends to have a way of affecting us more deeply than, say, you know, a very, like, somebody might go through a very traumatic car accident, but it just it affects us a lot, but it doesn't affect us in the same sort of core sense of self way that these interpersonal abuse experiences do. I can't remember if I talked about Dr. Salter last time, but she's written several books. She actually is the rare clinician who does work. She does work and research in the incarcerated environments with people who've been convicted of particularly sexual assault offenses. So she worked with the perpetrators of those crimes. And she worked in her private practice with people who'd been hurt in that way. So she worked with both the victim pool and the offender pool and wrote books in both areas. And she really, I think, had this deep understanding of the mindset that leads to behaviors of offending on children and adults and others, because understanding that mindset was really important, for her, you know, to like understand, because she was focused obviously on like, how do we stop people who are offending? How do we treat people who have offended? And even better, how do we prevent the development of this kind of mindset, right? Because this is, she argues, and I completely agree, no one is born to be a pedophile. No one's born to be a rapist. That is, like, we're still trying to figure out the complicated varieties of experiences that open the door to that sort of thinking pattern. But she did a lot to try to figure out that mindset. And she has this quote here of like, you know, we keep focusing on this idea that we can spot one, you know, like they people who are bad at sex offenders look like sex offenders and act a certain way and whatever, and we miss, as a society collectively and our systems in particular, are very tricked by the people who have a good double life, who have a good persona of respectability, right? So a person who has a job in a respected field or a respected company, who acts on the surface like they are, you know, just the most wonderful person and would never hurt a fly, sometimes those are the very people who underneath and in their hidden time are doing all sorts of stuff. And we need to not ever be like working off an assumption that, well, it couldn't be that person. You know, there is no profession or role or age or race or socioeconomic level that we have not found offenders working in. There is no, like, we don't have to worry about that group. But we still think that way, including cops. They've done studies on detecting deception and like buying into erroneous assumptions. And the people in professions where they think they can like tell, like I think I could determine whether or not somebody's being deceptive with me. Those people do worse than random chance at determining whether or not somebody's telling a falsehood. Partly because they think they should be able to know just in their gut, right? And instead, it's really important to look at the behavioral evidence almost like neutrally, like what do we know about the facts of this case thus far? I did a lot of this work in child welfare, and over again it would be like, well, yes, we have a child who said that they were touched inappropriately, and yes, their behaviors changed, and yes, the teachers have been concerned about this child, but the child won't say who or what or whatever at this point. They've clammed up, so we don't know anything. And I'm like, what do you mean we don't know anything? You just told me a whole bunch of things that we do know. And one of the things that we know statistically is for reports of abuse, assault, whatever, very few of those turn out to be false reports. Like somewhere between 4 and 8%. Which means that if a child or an adult even has said, this person did something bad to me, you have about a 92 to 98% chance that that person did something bad to them. Let's proceed accordingly. Instead of like getting all paralyzed with like, well, we don't know anything. We did like, sure you do. Sure you do. Research on sexual abuse for female children goes all the way back to 1929, so about 100 years now. And unfortunately, the statistics have not changed very much at all. It's still about 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 25%, 30% of females will experience sexual abuse in her lifetime. Oops. Research with male survivors is much more recent, a phenomenon, but generally we're finding 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 boys experience some form of sexual abuse in their lifetime. And in terms of completed or attempted rape, 1 in 5 women, 1 in 71 men. I think I heard a statistic more recently that was a little bit less than that, but these statistics are painful because they are so unchanging over time, and partly because we haven't really gotten our hands on around what we need to do to prevent the sexual abuse of people in our society. There are evidence-based approaches that we know work, and we have not embraced them as an American society. The study of this goes, there was a big study in 1980 where Dr. Abel was able to, I don't know how they got permission to do this, probably wouldn't be able to now. They worked in the prisons, and they wanted to be able to offer sex offenders immunity to talk freely about their behaviors and how many victims they had and what they'd done to them, and get really a sense of all that. Got immunity for those individuals, and they found in that study that the 232 people that were in prison for molesting children reported having a total of 17,000 victims, children. of varying types and levels. And most of those offenses had never been detected or reported at all. And even where they were reported or talked about, it very rarely led to anybody having legal consequences. So Abel then crunched the numbers and computed at that time that the chance of being caught and held accountable for these crimes was at about 3%. So what are the qualities that make a good child sexual abuser? Well, double life, the ability to lie and convince other people of your goodness, of your non-violentness, of your you're the person to go to in many ways, like good eye contact, a conveyed sense of sincerity, not nervous, but truly a double life where both the child is groomed, but also the adults in the child's life is groomed. You know, the person who's very likable, radiating, there was a phrase I saw, radiating upstanding trustworthiness. Like, I'm absolutely the person you can ask to babysit. I've spent a lot of time raising my nieces and nephews, whatever, right? You're convincing people that they can let their guard down around you. But underneath, there's a very deep sense of self-centeredness and entitlement and a lack of real empathy. It's fake empathy. For female child sexual abusers, that was an even rarer, less defined, less understood field of within child sexual abuse. And Salter kind of really found like they operate differently in many ways. They found 3 basic types in the research of females who act out sexually toward children. One group is they molest children under the age of 6, primarily their own children. And it's very hard to detect, obviously, because women tend to be the caregivers in our society a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. And if they're home with their own children under the age of 6, they're not even in school yet, there's not really many witnesses. And the children are too young to report. They don't even know anything's off about this experience because they don't know any different. The second group is more known in the media and in movies. It's that, the teacher or female in a role of not an authority role, but like an adult woman who convinces herself that she's, she and a teen or a child are in love. And every so often there's cases in the news where a teacher or a therapist or a youth worker is caught in these sorts of situations. And then lastly, I think, and we could see any of these types in our work, but women who have a pretty abusive or dysfunctional partner, male partner, adult partner, who then get sort of drawn into doing sexually abusive things to children, with children, or bringing children to that partner to satisfy that partner. And kind of in the context of a pretty dysfunctional and or abusive relationship with them. And again, similarly, self-centeredness and entitlement, even around like, it's like, well, I'm going to keep my man and he wants me to do XYZ to this child. And it's more important, like, what she needs is more important to her than protecting that child. In terms of rapists, because we kind of differentiate between child molester and rapist in some ways, but there's a huge overlap, obviously. But when we talk about, like, especially stranger rape or acquaintance rape, there is some overlap, but only about 1/3 of rape victims are raped by a stranger. Usually it's somebody they know. And most people are not molested by strangers. It's usually somebody they know. It could be a family member, close. You need access, right? The thinking pattern of people who look to hurt and dominate other people in these ways, they've studied that. There's a lot of research on this. Sometimes it's opportunistic. There's a big overlap between burglary and sexual assault in the home. And sometimes we don't know, did you break in to try to rape somebody and then there was just some stuff to steal? Or did you break in to steal and then you found somebody sleeping and decided to do that? But either way, it's like the willingness to commit that crime if the opportunity presents itself. Compulsive is more what we see in movies and things like that, where the person is likely to continue that behavior over and over again, because they are working out, and it's sort of like doing trauma reenactment, but they're the traumatizer. They're venting and playing out their anger and pain, and they're doing that compulsively. And then the smallest group, luckily, but still a very important group to know about, is individuals who have an attraction, like they get satisfaction out of other people's pain, suffering, terror, or humiliation. There's a lot of distorted thinking that goes on with these individuals doing the assaulting behavior. You have to really do a mental number on yourself to rationalize and validate doing terrible things to other people. And this is the laundry list that helps people get there. They feel entitled. They care about their needs first and not the other person's needs. They lack empathy. They lack a sense of remorse in most cases. Sometimes people feel badly after the fact, but if it doesn't change the behavior, then you have to recognize that maybe that sense of expressed remorse was just for show, because remorse should be a behavior changer. Often hostile attitudes towards it, this is women, but towards whomever they are targeting. I mean, sometimes transgender people are targeted, children are targeted, women. Sometimes it's homeless women. Sometimes it's women involved in sex trade become the focus. So whoever the target group is, they've usually got a long history of having hostile attitudes towards that group. And they are usually very much not willing to accept any sort of accountability for their behaviors. They see themselves as, it's not my fault because, right? And similarly, for a domestic batterer, that behavior obviously is in some ways more in the light of day, at least to the person, like they're not sneaking and hiding it as much because they're rationalizing it to the victim, at least the victim, and sometimes more people than the victim. But they are very, there's a lot of controllingness to domestic violence. There's a lot of manipulation. gaslighting, right? But the same accountability shirking, denial about their role, blaming everybody else but themselves. So there's a lot of similarity, I think, in that sense. For domestic violence, we see a lot of insecurity and hypersensitivity to criticism. Like, so if a person, I mean, the fights and the arguments can erupt over almost nothing because they're so, often so defensive when somebody brings up something that they think is, well, they experience it as a criticism, even if it's not. Even if it's just like trying to talk about something really small day to day. It's like, wait a minute. 1 second we were just talking about like the laundry, and now you have gone off the chain. Like, what is going on here? Um, so when we talk about, we're working with real people, real lives, right? So when we think about safety planning, I'm just going to undo that so I can type. When you think about safety planning with your clients, what are some of the safety planning focus areas, things that you have worked with clients on to hopefully increase their safety? And I'm not going to be able to see the chat, so just unmute and holler out, or I think I can see your little hands up, or if somebody could let me know when hands are up, but mostly just unmute and let's popcorn this out. I know you guys do safety planning all the time.
Finding the safest place that they're comfortable at if they need to run or flee.
Yes. Okay. So, and that could be like, let's go right now, or if this happens again, where can you go? Can you run to the neighbor? Can you run to your mom's house? Like, is there somebody who would take you in a moment's notice if you need to go there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. What else?
Having a bag that has like important papers and that kind of stuff, especially if they have kids.
Yep. Okay. So having kind of that flea bag, the go bag with the important documents set aside somewhere that the abuser doesn't know about it, but that person can grab it and go if they need to. And what might be in that? Like what are the important documents we think somebody might need to have?
Birth certificates, social security cards, medical.
Restraining order if there's one active, custody paperwork if that's been an issue.
Again, type. Yes. Good. All right. Other things.
I guess when communicating with them, a lot of times abusers are monitoring everything they're doing. So like possibly having a safe phrase with the person if you need to contact them, like not a safe word, but a phrase that's like, oh yeah, can you bring me some soap? That way you'll know that they're in trouble.
We'll call it a safe word. Yeah. Both for us as their provider, like, hey, if I say this, that means this person's within earshot, right? But also maybe even with their kids, if there's kids or if there's friends and family or neighbors that are trying to support, being able to have that sense of like, I can cue you that I need help, or I can cue you that you need to make yourself scarce by saying this word, right? Good. Other things. What are the ways that a person can stay safer while still living with the abuser?
Make sure firearms are secured if they do have them in their home, or try to make sure they don't come in the home to begin with. But if you can't prevent your partner from bringing them in, I would say be like, hey, we need to make sure this is locked up, because like we got kids, but don't make it seem like you're fearing them, because that can trigger an abuser. They
Yep.
feel like you're doing it to try to restrict what they're doing.
Yep. But can we find a reason to get these firearms a little bit more locked up, at least to buy somebody some time if they need to flee in that moment, if they're going for the gun, right? Firearms are particularly a lethal thing. Along that line, though, what about knives and other things that could be used against a person? They're around, right? I heard somebody doing some safety plan, a domestic violence advocate doing some safety planning with somebody once, and the client said, I try to make sure that the fight doesn't happen in the kitchen, because that's where the knives are. So even talking about areas of the house or apartment that are, free of weapons. If the guns are in the basement, like knowing, okay, I'm going to try to stay upstairs and make sure we're not ending up in the basement. Or if he goes down in the basement, or she goes down in the basement and she's angry, I'm going to go ahead and duck on out at that point, rather than risk that they come back up the stairs with whatever or same going in the kitchen, right? Some of this is talking through the patterns that the person has seen. Because people do tend to operate in similar ways, or at least give little clues as to what they might be capable of. So how the fights have gone in the past is a good predictor of how they might go in the future. And we also want to pay good, close attention to, I'm just going to have to make this smaller, but what threats does the abuser verbally use? What have they threatened? If it's like, I'm going to beat your ass, that's a different threat than, if you do this, if you do blah, blah, blah again, I'm going to set you on fire. Right? Knowing because a threat conveys what's going through somebody's internal mind thoughts. And it's something that as we'd want to help safety plan around. And if it's like, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to, that's why we worry about that level of threat differently, because it means they're already thinking about, in a circumstance, I will want to kill you, which is different, right? I mean, that's a whole different severity level, a whole different mindset. So I always ask the survivor, like, when there's conflict, what is that person saying? What are they threatening? When they're doing the making up afterward, what is it they're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because it tips their hand. It gives us a little window into their inner thinking. And the survivor, the person who's going through the situation, it's like, I always say, do you think they might carry that out? Do you have a gut feeling that they might do that someday? Because a lot of times when they interview women, or people, I've read more of the research on women who their partner eventually tried to kill them, they had the fear that that person was going to try to kill them, or even the certainty that they were going to try to kill them before that incident actually happened. So that whole, helping the person start to trust their guts. The pattern of domestic violence erodes our sense of self-esteem, and it erodes our sense of trust in our own way of seeing the world. And so we want to be reinforcing that you deserve to be safe, you deserve to be free of abuse, and you deserve to trust your gut, because you've got some inner wisdom based on the experiences that you've had with this person. And you know this person best. So I'm gonna trust your gut, and I really want you to learn to trust your gut. Safety planning can be really stressful for us as providers, because we know that there's not like safety in the full sense of the word that we might wish it to be. Like, it's why we focus so much on, well, can we get her to go to a shelter? Can we get her to leave this person? But remember too, that it's very dangerous if and when they do physically start to try to separate and leave. That actually is a very high risk time. We're seeing it with the Category 4 work, that just because they leave don't mean that the epic saga is over. And sometimes that causes an escalation in the violence. So it's really, when I do think that there are situations that are toxic that we ultimately need to find a way to work our way out of in order to be in a healthy environment. That is absolutely true also. I just know that the way, like the plan for leaving and staying away from this person has to be really, really thought out and really planful, because abusers who have that control issue can be very, very persistent, very determined. I mean, domestic violence and stalking are very overlapping in terms of how long afterward is that person gonna try to engage. And I did a stalking support group with one of the folks that's at Sojourner. We did it for maybe 2 years, something like that. And man, oh man, the women in that group, most of them had moved states. Like, they literally tried to get away from their stalker, like by moving states, changing their identities, you name it. And for some of them, they just kept on and kept on and kept on. So prevalence, lots and lots and lots of people experience domestic violence. About 1 in 4 women, and I know that held up for LGBT as well. So, it's not a rare thing, not a rare experience to go through at some point. It seems to me that our clients experience higher than average levels of partner and family violence. I think it's one of the things that keeps people stuck, in the criminal system, also in, homelessness. Like, I think this like chaotic relationships are absolutely part of the story for so many of our clients. And like we've been talking about, trauma work is stabilizing our thoughts, stabilizing our feelings. Some of that is internal work for sure, but some of it is external work, in the sense of, it's hard to have Zen inside if we have chaos all around us, right? sometimes we do need to work on concretely, like stable first, housing first. Like, do I have a safe home in which to live? And with, even if it's just myself, if it's myself and children, if it's myself and a partner, like, is our home stable enough and safe enough? Then, I mean, it's, we're not shooting for perfection, but that to me feels like a really key foundation in order to have a sense of inner peace, is to actually have peace in our home and in our actual surroundings. Sometimes the home is safe, but the people that we're interacting with are not. And the classic is kind of staying too in touch with family members who don't have our best interests at heart. And unfortunately, our society and our cultures often pressure people to stay in very close touch despite any kind of history, including sexual abuse, physical violence. Like, well, doesn't matter. You just need to spend time with that person, because that's your dad, or because that's your mom, or because that's your grandpops, or you name it. It's like the message is very clear to so many people, where it's like, you don't matter. You have to be in relationship with these family members. They matter, that what they want matters more than what you need. And it's a very destructive message, from a healing perspective. Now, we don't tell anybody what to do, who to see, any of that, right? Every adult person gets to decide who they have in their life. Period. Full stop. What we do in counseling is we talk through the relation. Like, it's nice to do with, like, you draw a circle. Who's in your inner circle? And then have the person talk about each of those people in that inner circle. And sometimes they'll say no one, which is actually, we worry about that response, meaning they don't have that much support, but it's a more honest support. It's a more honest analysis than the person who puts all sorts of people in there. And then when you start talking about them one by one, we're like, wait a minute, this does not sound like a support circle. This sounds like a circle of folks that you have to keep your guard up all the time. And meanwhile, they're going to, hurt you emotionally every time they're given the chance. Right. So all of that kind of work of, like, evaluating, in what ways is this person supportive? In what ways do they, do they ever hurt your feelings? Do they ever hurt you in any kind of way? Right. Do they steal your money? Do they talk bad about you to other people? Like, there's a lot of different ways somebody can be hurtful. So are they really a support person? Maybe they're a support person in one way. Like, maybe it's a person who will, if you get behind on your We Energies bill, they're going to help you get caught up on your bill. But you don't want to talk to them about your childhood sexual abuse because they're the person who's been blaming you all this time. Right? So figuring out healthier boundaries with unhealthy people is absolutely good safety planning work. All right. Domestic violence, which includes stalking and includes sex trafficking, all the category 4, right, is the leading cause of injury to women. That won't surprise anybody on this call, but the breadth of it is still pretty staggering. Like, more than everything else combined. If a woman walks into the emergency room with injuries, the reason we're supposed to do standardized, are you safe at home questioning, is because a lot of the time, when a woman has an injury, it's been put on her from somebody who's supposed to be loving her. And domestic violence lands women in prisons, hospitals, mental hospitals, and homeless. Probably if we looked at one variable, if we could only remove one thing from women's lives that would decrease all of the chaos in their lives, domestic violence would probably be my top pick, because it has ripple effects in so many directions, including driving continued substance use. Because if you're living in domestic violence, you're sure going to want to be numbing that out as much as possible. You probably have already seen this, but if you haven't, or just as a reminder, this is the Duluth Model Power and Control Wheel, is what it's called. And it outlines, it was created from a lot of different groups with a lot of different domestic violence survivors. And the model notes that the physical violence, when it happens, or the physical assaults, the sexual assaults, are the thing that we might see, but the dynamics of an abusive relationship are happening all the time, not just when there's violence. And sometimes there's not acute physical or sexual violence that you would see. And sometimes people will say, well, I didn't think it was domestic violence because he never put his hands on me. But all this other stuff is going on. So they'll say, I was in a toxic relationship. I was in a dysfunctional relationship, right? It doesn't have to have hands-on violence or hands-on sexual assault, because it's really about these power and control dynamics, unhealthy dynamics. And I use the words that the person in front of me uses. I don't start talking about, oh, your batterer does this and you're bad. Like if the way she's framing it is, well, I don't like the way this person treats me, then I'm going to be talking about like, well, let's look at how this person treats you. Like what is part of their pattern? And I might use this circle as almost like a little checklist. They can highlight or circle the things that they've experienced. And sometimes that is a wake-up call that, wow, this person is using a lot of these tactics. And so we need to think about this relationship as one that is, healthy in some, maybe it's healthy in some ways and unhealthy in these ways, versus just like all or nothing thinking. I know we're kind of coming up on the 10 o'clock. Let me just say, around the pathway of help and health. I'm trying to establish us a little more deeper relationship with Sojourner so that we can cross-pollinate services, access to services, and training, because so many of our clients could benefit from that additional support from their organization. But we've also beefed up what we can do on our end here at the Women's Harm Reduction Program site. We can get people into our Seeking Safety group, which is a curriculum, and you guys have access to it I think in all the programs. You can have access to the curriculum in your shared drive. So for example, anyone could tap into that curriculum and start to use pieces of that curriculum on a one-on-one basis in one-on-one conversations or workshops at Sisters, at the CRC, or at MLK, right? That information is there at our fingertips. Seeking Safety is designed to help people start to recognize that trauma is impactful in our lives, and it's kind of like early trauma work. So it's not going to have people sharing their stories and all that kind of stuff, but it starts to put the concept of trauma-informed care into motion for clients. So if you've had some of those conversations, used a little bit of that curriculum one-on-one, and the client has responded favorably, and you think, wow, this client would really benefit from being in the Seeking Safety group. Anybody can bridge into that group. So your next step would be to contact Paige and say, hey, we've got a client coming out of CRC, or a client who's, over at Sisters I've been working with on these, trauma related safety goals. And I think she's ready. She said she wants to try Seeking Safety group. And I think that's a nice first step, because maybe somebody doesn't want to do their aorta treatment yet, but they are concerned with their trauma or their trauma history or their depression from trauma in the past. Seeking Safety is a logical recommendation, okay? And I think when we meet next time, we'll talk about the Seeking Safety group, CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy, and I think prolonged exposure also, just so y'all have a sense of what kind of that exposure protocol would look like, because we're not going to probably be doing prolonged exposure because it's very intensive and flooding, but the idea of exposure therapy can be, we are doing little elements of exposure when we're doing assessment, when we're talking about things with clients. So we can do that more intentionally if we know about kind of like what we're trying to accomplish with exposure. So questions or recommendations for upcoming work. I'm just going to stop sharing so we can just talk. I mean, stop recording. That's what I meant. Stop. All right.